Hello and welcome to a day in the life of a pen tester. Today I have two special guests, my friends Charles Dardeman and Tinker Sec, both of them members of the Dallas Hackers Association, and Tinker Sec is the MC and co-host. And it's really an honor to have them on the show today. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And we'll start off with the introductions. Chase, how about you kick it off for us?
All right, my name's Chase or Charles Dardeman. I've been doing information security for a little over 5 years on offense and defense. Currently a senior pen tester at Critical Start on Team Ares. And before that, I did reverse engineering, malware, application security, and even just Windows administration and things like that.
And Tinker, why don't you tell our audience about yourself?
Sure. So, pleasure to be here and good to be here with you, Chase, as well. I'm a full scope penetration tester, red team when it calls for it. So that's logical, physical, and social systems. I've been doing this for a handful of years. As you mentioned, I do co-organize the Dallas Hackers Association. And yeah, that's about that. Prior to that, I did served in the SOC trenches with the blue team, and prior to that, I served in the Marine Corps.
We're going to start this off. The questions we usually ask on here are the same questions of most of our guests because it's interesting to get the different opinions of everyone. I mean, you think the same question will get the same response all time, but that's not the case. And so, Tinker, could you tell me, this first section, we're going to cover best practices. So
Sure.
What's your definition of a pen test?
So I like using, kind of generic terms. So it's a lot of folks get really hung up on nomenclature and word choice and definition, and that's fine. But generically, I see a penetration test as manual security quality assurance, more on the emphasis of manual. I would really throw it against the idea of say a vulnerability scan is more of an automated test, right? Pen tests will use vuln scans at times. You have to kind of throw it in there, but you have to at least manually validate it and move on from there. It's different also from, say, a bug bounty, where bug bounties it is manual quality assurance, but bug bounties tend to be wide but narrow, whereas penetration tests wide but shallow, whereas penetration tests tend to be narrow but deep. So a pen test can go anywhere from a very narrow scoped pen test to, say, one specific security implementation, say a locked door, if you will. Pen test this door. Okay, well, we'll look at the door. And it can go up to more full scope where you're looking at an entire system, so you look at the windows as well. Where full scoped pen tests bleed into the concept of red team. Red team tends to be, no holds barred. It's more if a pen test is a unit test, if we're using developer terms, if a pen test is a unit test, a red team tends to be an integration test, right? How do they all fit together? But pen test is very generic, and that's why we keep having this question pop up. Really, it's just manual security quality assurance.
Yeah, so not a whole lot to add to him. I will emphasize the manual part of this, the difference between doing a vuln scan and having an actual person sit down and evaluate your systems and security controls and configurations is a world of difference. Not only in the quality of what you're going to get, but also what they're going to find and how creative they are in ways around your controls and what you've built in place.
Great comments, guys. Just to add to it, I teach my students each semester that, there's different levels of testing. As mentioned, vulnerability scanning and then vulnerability assessment. Then you're adding validating the findings during an assessment. During a pen test, you're actually exploiting those. And then, as mentioned, the red team is adversarial simulation. But those are great comments, great input. What should be tested during a pen test, Charles?
Preferably everything. I mean, every client has their own requirements for each pen test, right? Most ones we mostly do are tons of web app pen tests. We have a lot of iOS and mobile pen tests as well. So traditional internal or external pen test is just IPs, and we test for every single thing we can within the scope to try to find what an attacker could do given the same amount of time and resources that we have. So, I mean, what should be tested? I would say always look for the low-hanging fruit, right? There's a lot of stuff in there. People's environments that are left open, you'd be surprised how many default configurations there are, misconfigurations, things like that you just have to go through that are left over, because a lot of bigger companies have, not only do they have some shadow IT going on, they just have legacy systems that have been left alone for years because they're working or been forgotten about, that you can often find.
Yeah, those are good points about systems left behind. That's one of the things I think, even for people that are doing, pen test or bug hunting, if you find an application, there's a lot of times that people abandon web application servers or web servers that were used before, and instead of decommissioning it, it's still there. And sometimes that's a way for a pen tester to get in. And so those definitely need to be looked at to prevent someone malicious from getting in. So Tinker, what is your opinion?
I agree with a lot of what Chase said. One thing that kind of comes up in discussion, Chase said ideally test, everything, and I fully agree with that. The flip side to that is narrow scope pen tests have a lot of value too. I'll give kind of an example. Say a company has never had a pen test, so they just want to say, hey, what's available? So you have this full scope pen test. So you're able to, your final goal is really just to try to get into the internal network, and once there, see how far you can go. And so they say, hey, everything's open. And you do one of those. And maybe it said, hey, we were able to phish you, and we were able to hack into an out-of-date web server, right? And so there's two ways to get in. And the company says, okay, well, we'll work on this. And maybe they're able to say, okay, well, we were able to, patch the web servers, get all those up there. But the phishing, that's going to take a lot longer. So they implement training, they implement email security proxies, et cetera. But it's going to take them, say, 8 months really to get to where they want to be able to say, okay, it's solid. So they might come back and say, hey, look, we know you can get in by phishing right now. We don't need you to prove that again. We're implementing solutions, and once we've got it implemented, we'll want you to test the efficacy of that implementation. But for right now, can you just do a limited pen test of all externally facing, network services and web services? And so in this sense, it's like, yeah, it's okay to have a narrow pen test that maybe a type of test is out of scope. The danger of this is that there might be false senses of security. Just because I couldn't get in by network doesn't mean that they're secure to say phishing. But for a customer that has a mature view or an understanding of security, and they say, hey, we're going to take this pen test. We know the limitations of this test. We know that it's only within this little area, but this is what we want to test right now. It can be very good both on testing that implementation, but also from a budgetary limitation. If they don't have that much money to test everything, they can at least test the specific things that they can work on in that short moment. I see a lot of value to that.
To kind of add to that,
sure.
One thing we often do is that our team does is that, so sure, clients just want like an internal, right? Well, getting DA, everyone knows, is pretty easy, especially if they have some common misconfigurations.
Mm-hmm.
So then we come back to the client. We're like, well, what else are your goals? Like, do you have any source code that you would be terrified to lose? Do you have any section of servers that hold your most critical data that we can kind of try to go after too, and like sub goals within the test, because that might show more impact to clients, right? Let's say they do have some source code that they use to generate gift cards or anything like that. Like being able to say, I got onto this dev's workstation, which gave me access to your Git repo and can read the source code on this, is more valuable to that client than just a wide pen test without any true goal other than finding issues that you have.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chase. Having goal-based things. The idea is you set up security to protect whatever it is you need to protect. To do a flip example, instead of say I'm testing, you know, the proverbial bakery, right? Bakery doesn't care if their recipe gets out, doesn't care if their source code gets out. It's there, but they do care about uptime. And so, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily care about getting, you know, access, but I would care about making sure that, say, a ransomware attack, you know, wouldn't affect them. So I agree with Chase on that. When you say what should be tested during a pen test, I think it really does need to start with what is the purpose of your security? What is your goal when you're trying to secure, you know, your logical or physical networks, and then you test towards that goal to make sure that the security implementations actually protect that goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are some really great points, and I like the idea of during the test, you know, finding things and going that direction and get more input from the client. Too many times things are just static, and you do what's on the scope and leave it at that. I know in my past consulting career, we would go through after the pen test and make recommendations based on what we've seen. If we saw lacks physical security, we would recommend a physical security assessment, social engineering, or those type of things, depending on what we saw during the test. We saw a lot of web apps. A web application pen test wasn't in scope, then we'd recommend that. So I definitely like your ideas of making the test more fluid and dynamic, and just kind of changing and focusing on the weaknesses that you see. So when do you think a customer should look at having physical security tested?
Chase, we were talking a little bit about this beforehand. I've got some pretty strong opinions on the physical side. I'll say something, then let kind of Chase finish up on that, because I kind of took over the last word on that one. I apologize. Physical security, it's just like anything. So a lot of places, their networks are like, say, an egg, you know, hard outer shell, gooey internal. And as soon as you get into the inside, you can pretty much go anywhere. Chase mentioned, you know, getting DA with a couple misconfigurations, and he's absolutely correct. And so that's why you have your internal pen test. You assume that you got breached, right? But there's really a handful of ways to breach that perimeter to get access to the inside. And, you know, one is through external network, the other is through external, you know, phishing or social engineering, as it relates, you know, from a distance, right? But one big way that you can get access to an internal network, especially a traditional on-prem network, is by physically going into the premises and plugging in into a network jack. A lot of the traditional Active Directory environments, once you're on an internal subnet, and if it, you know, doesn't have once you're on an internal subnet, you're basically trusted, and you can kind of go from there. So I would say that you need a physical pen test if you have those traditional Active Directory on-prem environments. A lot of places are going kind of, especially smaller shops, are going full, you could call it zero trust, but really cloud-based, you know, where a lot of people are remote, or even if they're in the network, all they're really doing is connecting to a Wi-Fi and then going out to various different cloud services and whatnot. Being physically breaking in there doesn't really get you too much of an advantage, except for maybe sharing a subnet with some target computers. So really, I throw it back. If a company locks its doors or invests in physical security, whether it be badge systems, multi-factor pen pads, biometrics, what have you. If a company has a secured facility, then you need to test the security of that facility. If a company works in co-work locations where they don't really care if somebody gets physical access, they have, you know, encrypted hard drives, they've worked out the risk that if it gets stolen, it's fine, then you don't really need a physical security test. But that's kind of the thing is did you lock up the door? Well, if you lock the door, you need to test the lock.
Yeah, I would agree with Tinker. And basically, if you put any control in place, how do you know that it's working unless you test it? So if you put man traps into your building and you've never tested that, are you sure that you'll actually stop anybody? Or will they just let them through anyway? You test those kind of things. And physicals can also be used to test certain PCI environments. So if you have a cash register that connects back to your headquarters, and it sends credit card data. What could someone do if they walked into the store and took the cash register, or they plugged into it or anything like that? Could they get back to your corporate location, and would your employees even know that happened? So those are also some other things that can be tested for.
Or if they took your domain controller.
Yeah.
Yeah, folks glommed onto that story a little too much. It really wasn't that big of a deal. I liked what they said. Like, I might steal a physical domain controller, but you, Phil, you'll steal an entire rack.
So that's a very, very good conversation, guys. Want to get your opinion on what you think gets overlooked during a pen test. A lot of times people focus so much on a network pen test or external, and there's areas that always gets missed. So, Chase, what do you think gets overlooked?
IPv6 and UDP. No, that stuff's never scanned. So everyone gets on there, they throw mass scan up or Nmap, they start looking around, and they don't have time or don't know to look for IPv6 and UDP, and there's ways in there, they're just less common.
Yeah, that's some interesting points.
No, that's I fully agree with that. I'll choose a more traditional answer, and I'll stop answering with the basics when I stop seeing it. But it really is scope, both in and this is more for what gets overlooked when a client's preparing for a pen test. Scope in what you're able to test, say network wise, but also in time. So. A very common mistake that I see clients do is they'll give me a list of individual IP addresses, and they'll say, "Hey, these are our assets. Test these." And I always say, give me a CIDR range that I know is you. Like if it's externally facing, like if it's just give me a range that's blocked off for you. And a very simple thing I might find is what we were talking about earlier is orphan systems. If I'm only testing what you know about, well, then I'm not testing what you don't know about. And a big find that I get in a lot of network side tests are those orphan systems that they don't appear on any asset list. They haven't been patched in 2 years, and they haven't been turned off in 2 years. And so when you get in, you find all sorts of domain admin tokens or whatever. And a cool thing about that finding is the answer is just turn it off because nobody's using it. And so the client is able to increase security and save money because it's been sucking down electricity this entire time just by turning it off. It's fairly straightforward. So that's one side, is the scope. Don't just give me individual IP addresses, give me a range. And the flip side is if you have systems that are, if they accidentally get toppled over and that could cause loss of life or limb, then by all means blacklist it. Say, hey, don't scan this, and we'll test it in a more methodical, less black box way. You still test it, but you test it with redundancy in place, and you have a person there that if it topples over, they can bring it back up real quick, so on and so forth. But you can say, hey, in your general black box pen test, don't test this right now. The last thing is time. Most malicious actors, most actual baddies, whatever you want to call them, they don't have unlimited scope, right? They're not going to sit there. Criminal organizations need to make money. So it's how much time and effort are we going to put into this before we make money, just like normal business. And even nation state, they're still like, they're going to have mission objectives that aren't going to go past several years, depending, right? But even still, most pen tests only last for, I don't know, a couple days, maybe for a single set of hosts and maybe a web app, to maybe a week or two. Even red teams will go out to maybe 3 weeks. Some of the big red teams I've been a part of have been 3 months, but it's still only that 3 months. Now, there's only so much I can do with an amount of time, right? But I'm not saying you have to give me forever, but you really want to make sure that the amount of time that you're giving for a test is appropriate for really what you're testing. So I'd say overlooked would be limits in scope of either time or assets to be scanned.
To add to that time part, one thing a client can do is that, because I only have, let's say, a week to pen test you, give me as much information as you can, because my goal is to find every misconfiguration, every issue, every vulnerability, everything I can break into. If I spend half of my time scanning or not knowing where things are, or if I'm doing a PCI test, you know, tell me where the PCI environment is, you know, you're spending your money and getting less out of it, right? Because I don't have 8 months to pen test you. I have 1 week. So you can get more value for your money by making it less purely black box as well.
Yeah. And you trade off a bit on the threat emulation, but you increase, as you say, what can be looked at. I fully agree with that.
Those are great points, guys. And I think for our listeners, for people that are getting pen tests from a third party, I think a lot of times just the scoping in general gets overlooked. They too quickly give out a scope list and really don't think it through on the targets that should be tested and their goals. It's like a lot of times they're just giving out IP ranges and URLs and that's it. So I really think people should take more time in their scoping, take it seriously, because you're only going to get as good as what you give scope wise for the pen test.
One thing, Phil, that I found that's kind of in this is a lot of times when clients are scoping the pen test, not everywhere, but a lot of times I find that the initial scoping is actually between the sales or the account manager and the client point of contact. And so it's in all the places that I've been, I've made it kind of a point, and Chase can probably speak to this as well, but the actual tester, the actual penetration tester should be a part of those scoping calls, to say, hey, and be that expertise, that consultant saying, let me hear what you need and what you want, and then let's build the test towards that. I've even started going in whenever a client will say, hey, here's our known CIDR range. Say for an external pen test, we're trying to hack in from the internet, right? They say, hey, here's my IP block. Here's my CIDR range. I know this is me. What I'll do is I'll say, hey, if we have time, I'll say, hey, I'm going to conduct some reconnaissance as well. And if I find IP addresses that I believe to be associated with you but are outside of scope, how about I send those to you? And if you go through and say, hey, no, that's a third party, it's not us, or hey, yes, that is us, go ahead and add it to scope. A lot of them are willing to do that. They'll go with what they know. But if I find something on my own, a lot of times we can add it to the scope afterwards in a very formal method. But having that back and forth, especially between the tester themselves and the client, as opposed to relying just on your account manager, that's very important. Clients that listen to that expertise and are able to kind of adjust it to their business needs get a lot out of it.
Yeah, great points. I think a lot of times, just along in the same spirit of your comments, I think it probably doesn't get described very well to the end user, to the customer on the test, and that probably affects the scoping as well, I would imagine. Okay, so what are some of the trends that you guys are seeing in pen testing?
I don't know, Chase. What do you think? You mentioned, like Chase mentioned, easy ways to get to DA, and I think that from a testing standpoint, the computers are so wide, right? There's always so many different ways in, but you as you hit different corporate environments, you tend to find the same things over and over again, and so you do kind of say, okay, hey, here's the 5 things I'm going to try, et cetera. So trends are interesting. I don't know, Chase, what do you think?
I mean, so on the defensive side, I've seen a lot of trend away from on-prem, more people moving into AWS, people moving their email provider to Google or Office 365, which makes it a lot more difficult to target or phish or even get access to sometimes. I mean, still one of the best ways in to any environment is a custom web app. We see that in every single test, pretty much. And then I've been seeing a lot more mobile tests or even if you're doing an external, finding their mobile app and using that to get as a way in has actually been pretty consistently worked well for us.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to throw like, what is it? Word salad, your common, cyber drink kind of thing. I agree with Chase. A lot of places have been going more cloud, not full blown cloud on everything, but even the web apps have been being hosted in cloud. Definitely email. Seen a lot of email going into the cloud. Uh, Interestingly enough, as the email goes in the cloud, I see a lot of legacy OWA servers become orphaned, and they just forget about it. They still have access to all the email, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes interesting. I guess to add on to what Chase said, because I fully agree with it, I am seeing more IoT stuff, and I hate using that term because it sounds so cheesy, but a lot of, custom display stuff within office environments, and a lot of smart things are being placed into those office environments. And the bulk majority I've seen of those are just, little Linux systems on a chip. Many of them are literally Raspberry Pis in a custom box with custom code. The security cameras, a lot of those are networked, but really those generically, the IoT stuff, a lot of that's being put in there as turnkey solutions. And because typically it's not put in by IT, it's put in by other, by facilities or audio visual or what have you, different teams besides IoT. It amounts to its own shadow IT at that point. And a lot of customers are relying on the vendors to maintain their own little smart devices. And vendors don't change the default passwords or have really old, outdated Linux systems on there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they are still ways to pivot and to gain access to those networks. So yeah, I'd say it's probably, Chase mentioned cloud and mobile, and I agree, and I'd add IoT. And I think at that point we have all the major catchwords besides blockchain and machine learning.
Oh no.
So.
I mean, you could also talk about like that silence attack. They were using machine learning, and the guy just bypassed it by taking a bunch of strings from a video game and throwing it into his binary.
That's the nature of it, So a lot of basically, if you can think of the sales jargon terms, you actually are seeing a lot of things. Now, whether they are actually those they're selling, but hey, sales folks get out there and they sell a product, and people are buying those products and they're shoving them into their systems.
Yeah, we're also I think another thing we're seeing more is when you talk about real small scope pen testing is we're getting firmware from IoT devices and IoT devices as whole, because bigger companies realize, oh no, I don't want to be that guy who had his camera hacked. Or whatever. So they're starting to send those through pen test companies to try and break in before they hit market.
Yeah, and that's smart. Folks don't realize that a lot of different people will hear firmware and they're like, oh no, it's this kind of this specialized thing, and all firmware generally is meant. I mean, Chase, you can speak to this more than even me, but all firmware has meant to me, as I've seen it, have literally just been Linux systems, and you boot it up like a Linux system or put it on like a mounted drive, and it's a Linux system with some pre-configurations, and a lot of them you can turn on SSH, or you can hack it just like you'd hack a Linux server, if you will.
Yeah, oftentimes we just see, especially when IoT, you see busy boxes.
Busy
box servers.
Yep.
With one custom Java app running.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Running on a BeagleBone or a Raspberry Pi.
Mm-hmm.
So this next question is: do you have any advice for aspiring pen testers? And I'm gonna let Chase take this one first.
So you have to be you really kind of have to learn a little bit of everything. Pen testing is not always extremely specialized. So everyone kind of specializes. I might be better at web apps or firmware testing or mobile testing or whatever, but pen testing as a whole is a very general field, because when you look at an environment, you have to know Windows, Linux, Mac, you have to know how phishing works, you have to know how network protocols work, you have to know how to admin Windows machines when you get on them, so you don't take them down, and you know what to look for that's wrong. So the kind of if you want to learn how to do pen testing, you kind of need to learn how applications work, and that way you can figure out how to break them. And experience, like I've seen a lot of very successful pen testers who have experience in like server administration, because as soon as they get on a Linux machine, they're like, oh, this isn't supposed to be here. I can use this to Prevask or anything like that.
Tinker, what is your advice?
I agree with that. Chase mentions learning a little bit about everything, and that's absolutely right. When I hear aspiring pen testers, I'm assuming people that are trying to get into pen testing, right, axiomatically. And so how to get into pen testing, you're going to need to really approach it kind of in two different ways. Half of it, you're going to need to study and, do your traditional study, however you learn, and then throw up your lab, et cetera, and learn that breadth of knowledge, and then learn how to research and learn, right? Because even on every single pen test, I'm learning something new. It sounds cliche, but it's true. The other big thing that I see a lot of aspiring pen testers not do, and it prevents them from becoming pen testers. A lot of these folks coming in, they know a crap ton more than me. I might, have a lot of experience over here, as Chase says, but they're coming from maybe a development background, which I know how to script and code, and I test web apps, but I didn't come as a web developer. And so they know more than me already, and they can immediately jump into it. They have the technical knowledge, but what they lack is the networking. And not IPv6 networking, right? But the actual how to get a job. And this is across all industries. In order to get a job, you need to have two things. You need to have a minimal of technical knowledge of whatever it is so that you can do the job, right? Most jobs will provide training, and you have continued on-the-job training and experience, et cetera, but you need a minimum amount to be able to get started, wherever that is. And the other big one is networking and knowing people. A lot of people fall under the misconception that in order to get a job, you apply on, Monster, Dice, Indeed, or whatever, and you can get jobs that way. I'm going to throw out a random statistic. I call it 10 to 20% of jobs get found through there, and that's just meant to say that a small amount, but still noticeable. And so most people try to get their jobs just by applying that way or hoping one falls in their lap. And I say, hey, spend about, if you're looking for a new job, spend about 1 day, 1 hour each day or whatever, applying for those jobs is fine. The biggest thing is networking. Phil, you mentioned on Twitter today that the bulk majority of your jobs, and you're experienced, is through in-person networking, whether at, like, for instance, here in Dallas, the Dallas Hackers Association, or DC 214, or OWASP, or North Texas Cybersecurity Group, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Dallas is special in that we have that networking glut. We have so many ways in. But even places that don't have that, they can at least, you can do a bit through social networking, right? But actually, if there's not a group there of enthusiasts, security or hacking, whatever, go and start one. And even if it's just 5 people that come a week or come a month, those 5 people will know other 5 people, et cetera, and you really start getting out there. So my biggest advice for aspiring pen testers is, yes, absolutely, you need to study the technical side. You can't do the job if you don't know the technical side. But you also don't get the job unless you know people. And they say, hey, I know where you're at. I know exactly what you know, and I know exactly what you don't know. Come on in, and we'll put you on the team.
Yeah, that goes to part of the fact that a lot of the job interviews, not just can this guy or girl or do the job, it's can I sit next to them for 8 hours a day and like them? A lot of the job interview is just, how are these actual people? Do they fit in with everyone else? Are they okay, right? And so networking allows you to say, oh, I'm already friends with you. I know who you are. I don't think we're going to have a problem. So let's just make sure you're technically okay and you can take this job. And it will help you kind of get through that.
Yeah, those are great points. And as Tinker said, my last 3 jobs were from people I knew from local meetups. 2 from Dallas Hackers and 1 from a local OWASP group. Another thing I think it does too is, if you talk to like hiring managers, they can see your communication skills and kind of see how you present yourself, if you would be good client facing or not. So you kind of get past that HR firewall, because when you talk to people, they get a better grasp of what you know, opposed to uploading your resume to online application system, because you may not have the same keywords that they have listed for that site. A lot of times those descriptions are created by HR people that don't really understand the job. So it's kind of hard to match up. I mean, around the time I went to work for my current employer, which is in the banking industry, I applied with one of their competitors, uploaded the resume, never got a call. Like a year later, they found me on LinkedIn, and then was wanting to interview me, but they totally missed me the first time around. And I had, OSCP web app and the SANS web app pen testing cert, several years of experience, very qualified for it, but never even got contacted.
Yeah, our team actually just hired 2 people off of that we met at DHA, just through networking. So it's both their first pen testing job.
That's great. And now we're down to the section of the webinar that I call open mic. Typically, we cover things that just wasn't discussed during our discussion that you might want to mention. And also, we open this up to telling your best pen test stories. So I'll leave it up to you if you guys have a message or even both. So Chase, why don't you tell me one of your best pen test stories or research stories?
Those are very different. So I guess pen testing story, the most fun pen tests for me are the ones that are really, really hard, right? If you go in and you get DA through Responder or whatever, those are always extremely boring tests. So one time on a pen test, we went to this company, not very large, only had like 2 IT guys, but they had the ability to do everything the way they wanted to. So somehow they got buy-in with their C-suite to actually put all the controls in place. So we were there on site about a week, and it took us until Wednesday to get a single user account because they had a printer that was no longer being used in the storage room that was still plugged in. We found it and we got in through there. And that user account had 0 permissions to anything besides a couple, like just anything, any open shares. So me and another guy spent the next 3 days of the pen test just looking through open shares until we finally found somebody's backup system. And then we had to use forensic software to use that backup and find anything they had written down, and they had written a password down, and we were able to finally get admin account through that.
Nice.
And it was just notable for me because of how difficult it was and how out of the normal pen testing. Like, we scanned everything. There was nothing wrong. Everything was patched. Their minimum passwords for their Windows systems for all users were 16 characters. Couldn't crack anything.
Brilliant.
So it didn't matter. So they just did everything right. And we were just able to use creative methods to try finally able to get an admin account and get into their systems.
So Tinker, what is your favorite story?
I've got a lot of stories, and so I don't know that I have a favorite one. Chase mentions, the esoteric stories, and those are my favorite stories to tell to other hackers. Especially at DHA over whiskey or something. You're like, no, I got this really weird one. I found, and those honestly are the stories that we live for. Those are the ones that really get us going. The favorite stories that I like to tell to the general public, though, and on podcasts are the exact opposite. I like telling the stories that are the most common. And I make a joke that I'll stop telling these stories when they stop being common, because that means that people are fixing them. If I can make a joke about burnout and depression, and I don't make the joke lightly, is that, when you do the same thing over and over again, getting into pen testing sounds sexy at first, and it's a great job. I love it. I'm going to be doing this or some form of information security moving forward. But when you get in, everything's new and exciting. Oh, you're breaking into places you're not supposed to be. But when you've hit like the 5th bank and they're all the same thing, and you run Responder and you get it, like Chase says, it becomes fairly boring to us, and it can lead to burnout, and it can lead to a lack of a sense of fulfillment, et cetera. But so what I do is I tell those stories that are very, very common, so that even non-technical people, they can go, hey, are we doing this? So I'll tell a very quick story And then I want to hear a research story from Chase, because he has an amazing one and he's holding back on it right now. And I think we should end on that because that's an awesome story, and that affects people, the common folks, or non-technical, I should say, not necessarily common. It's terrible. But my favorite one of the favorite things that I like to do on all pen tests, and a very recent one, this happened, and it was slightly different. So in Active Directory environments, Windows, your traditional Windows environment, one thing that a lot of people don't realize, and even systems and network administrators don't realize, is that when they make changes within the domain controller, anybody with a valid user account can see that, right? So for us, it's sysvol, and anything that within sysvol, you have the group policy objects, and you have scripts, etc. And all that is for non-technical audiences. Whenever you plug in your computer and it connects to the central server that controls everything, the domain controller, it communicates and says, "Hey, what am I supposed to do?" Most normal employees will see this as, say, a share auto mount. So they see in their Windows Explorer that, hey, the Z drive popped up, and that's where I'm supposed to put all that stuff there, or what have you. Or whenever they turn their computer on, it tries to automatically, go to, I don't know, internet page or something like that. Because it's all going in the background, a lot of folks don't realize that you can literally connect to that like an external folder with your own credentials and rifle through everything. And the traditional things to look for are, scripts that have hard-coded passwords in them that you can see, and maybe like C password, which is an old way of handling local administrative accounts. That you can, even though nominally it's encrypted, everybody knows the key, and so you can decrypt it. Those are the traditional ones. The slightly different one that I'll throw for this one, just for Chase's sake, because you might like this, is I was going through this very normal thing. It's one of the very first things that hackers go for. And I had stolen somebody's, credential, and I think it was like summer 2019, or it's something silly. Because all I need is one. I don't care whose it is. I just need one good credential to get in there. And I went through group policy preference, GPOs, the group policy objects, looked for C password, etc. Didn't find that. And I went through scripts and didn't really find anything there. But I downloaded everything and then just started grepping for common terms, including pass, etc. But I found a custom group policy object that is not normal Windows at all. But what it did was it created a kiosk account out in the middle of one of these branch offices that they could, the people could go in there. I want to say they did time stamping or something like that. But this was something made in-house, some bespoke code, if you will. Mm-hmm. And it created a local admin account on the computer and then booted up the computer and put it into kiosk mode. So it ran an application and nominally took away, the start menu, et cetera. And there's many ways to do that, but this would do it through the network. And so we were able to get it, we got into the network on one branch office, and then across the country, we found this group policy object that would create these kiosks in multiple different branch offices. And so what we ended up, we were able to pivot and get admin access on these kiosks. And they were Windows machines, right? They just had a touch screen on it with no start menu, but they were Windows machines. But so that was and we were able to then pivot into pretty much any branch office that we wanted to, and have a beachhead in each of those offices with local admin on a Windows machine. And we were able then to pivot through there. But that was using a very common attack that you find everywhere and everybody can look at on their own. But because, and I should say, the local admin password was in the clear. It wasn't even, there's no form of obfuscation whatsoever. They hard-coded the credential in this special GPO. You won't find blog posts or CVEs about this because it's not applied. These guys made it themselves, and then whoever made it, had left the offices like 5 years prior. So I don't even know if they knew how it was working at that point. But I was using a very common attack and found a weird, uncommon, customized script that had just, gave me access to everything. So that's probably one of my favorite stories.
That's pretty neat. You always find the most interesting stuff on custom.
Yes.
You're that IT person writing code at 3 a.m. to get your server back up, and you just
exactly.
Let's just get this going. And so then you forget about it because you have another fire the next morning. It's out there until I come across and I'm like, oh look, here's what I
And yeah, I can't blame them. I mean, it worked. It did the business need. It's just they had it. They thought because it's in GPO that the only people who could see it, were those high level systems or network admins or domain admins themselves. I mean, it's stored on the domain controller, and you can't get access to that unless. And I can't knock them because you're right, Chase. It fulfilled a business need, and they got it done and probably had to move on to something else.
Yeah, and if you've ever worked in IT, and I think you have, then you know what it's like to just chase fires for a living, and you never have time to clean up.
Yeah, that's the truth. I forget what code I wrote 2 weeks ago. So, so I have to insist, Phil, if you don't mind. Chase did some really cool research with smart locks, and I personally would like to hear about it.
Yeah, me too.
Do you want from the beginning or just from the research?
Phil, how much time do we have? I think we should end on that.
All the time he needs. Yeah, let's.
Chase, you take it. I'm going to mute. I'm just going to listen.
Okay. You were part of this, man. You got it. You want me
to? I helped get it going, and I was able to start on it, but I had to chase another fire. And
Which reminds me, I don't think I ever paid you back.
No. That's my only country. So no, you tell the whole story, but I didn't do much.
All right. So I guess the two of you at least are very aware of the of Leslie. And when she was forced into her apartment, forced her into having a smart lock built into her apartment. So she's very vocal and a great technical person. So she took the lock apart and was like, this is terrible invasion of my privacy, which it is. And the fact that the manual says don't have a lock on a building with one access point because it could fail because of batteries or anything like that. So, a couple of us, Tinker included, and Jason, my friend, as well, we actually bought the smart lock that SmartRent was using and took it apart over a weekend for 0 Day All Day, which is an event here in Dallas where a bunch of people get together with different IoT devices or software, and we just try to break into something over like 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours. So a couple of us got together for that, and we took this lock apart and found that it had hard-coded SSH credentials on all of the locks. So we took that same. They were using the SSH host key as a root authorized key. So we took that same one and we scanned, we used Shodan and looked for it, and we could find like multiple other ones, so we knew it wasn't unique. And then we just read the API of the hub, and basically they were using a hash of a password in order to unlock or send commands to and from locks from this hub. So with the SSH key, we knew that, hey, we can log into this device and touch anything on there. And unlike most modern IoT devices, which are not having local APIs, this one was still doing the old method, which was have a local API. That way, if your internet goes down, you can still open your door or change your thermostat. So we could just hit it directly. So in order for this API to work, it had to have the password hashed on the system too. And the way their API worked was that it didn't matter if you knew the password, because it just checked the hash, and you only passed the hash to the API, and it just checked one-to-one hash. It was like a nuance. So with that, since we could use the hash to unlock the door. So we just had to put those kind of things together. So basically what the actual hack was two super basic things chained together, which was we can log into the device with SSH. We know the exact location that the hash is stored for the local API, pull it off, and then just pass that same hash back with like a 1 and to unlock or close doors. And so that's what the video is. And if you guys go to my Twitter or read the blog post we had out on it, with the scripts are there as well. We could just open this Zapato Smart Hub door. Any door that was connected to it. So that entire apartment complex and any apartment complex using it at the time was vulnerable to this, and you could just open their door if you're on their Wi-Fi or had access to their smart hub at all. So that was done over like one day. It was one day to take it apart, one day to review the software, and one day to write the script to automate it. So in about 3 days of minimal effort, you can take these things apart. And just like we were talking about IoT earlier, this was literally just a Raspberry Pi with like a little hat module on top of it for Z-Wave configuration. So it's not hard to do these kind of firmware research, because anyone can have a Raspberry Pi. It's just a Linux system. It's super easy to pull the SD card out on that and kind of go through the software. So I think I rambled a bit on that, but that was
that was awesome.
Great story.
They Chase, both you and Anit, they posted up a video of them basically, you know, if they get access to this hub, and it's not that difficult to get access to very certain hubs. You have to be on, you know, a shared network, and a lot of these apartment buildings, you can either hack the Wi-Fi to get on it, or break into a room and get access to the logical network, and then
we found like 10 of them just straight on the internet.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, there were several that were exposed to the internet, so you didn't even need to be locally there. But
they just opened their door.
God, it hurts. And so, yeah, I love it because, you know, a lot of times, you know, we talk about physical pen tests, and a lot of times the physical pen test, the point of a physical pen test is to break in to get network access. So we first try to break in physically, and that gets us into the internal logical network, right? But Chase is over here where he's hacking the logical network to then get in physically, right? And so, you know, it all flows, physical, social, and logical. There's really no wall between any of those. And so the idea is, you know, as an attacker or as a defender defending it, what's the ultimate thing that you're trying to get to, you're trying to prevent someone else getting to. And then if it's physical, you can go in through the logical network or social. If it's a person, you can go physically or logically. If you're trying to get into the network, you can go physical and social. You know, the kind of three different aspects of life, it all flows. And I love that Chase and Anit just tore that apart.
And the best part of that was that not only could you do it locally, but if you took your creds, which were set up by the apartment building, because the apartment buildings want to manage all of them, you could then open everybody in your apartment building store.
Yeah, that hurts.
So when you're out of milk, you know, you just home, just open their door and go in and get it and leave a little note.
I don't think that's
the use case, right?
Yeah, that's the use case. Absolutely, that's terrible.
So I will say that has been patched, but it's still out. I'm sure that not everybody's patched it, but the Zapato and SmartRent especially went and patched it within 90 days. And so if you have that, you can't use the exact same issue on it, but they're pretty easy to research if anyone wants to take a crack at it.
Great story. So we're down to the end of the show, guys. I really appreciate you joining. It was an awesome discussion. I think this was going to be a big hit. Are there any parting comments either one of you would like to give?
No, I think we covered it. Come hang out with Phil, Chase, and I at Dallas Hackers Association first Wednesday of every month. I don't know, buy us drinks and we'll do more stories, and we'll buy you drinks and we'll get stories. And if you don't drink alcohol, we'll buy you tea, water, coffee, or boba tea or what have you. Come hang out in Dallas. It's a fun place.
Yep. I'll agree with that.
Thanks again, guys. And thanks for all our guests for joining.